All right, good morning, everybody. All right, everybody grab your seats, please. Well, thanks for being here today. This morning, we've got our very first speaker for the Commandants Speaker Series, Major General retired Mike Rothstein. General Rothstein retired from the Air Force in 2019 after 31 years of service. He brings a diverse practical leadership experience ranging from combat operations to aviation training, international relations, postgraduate education, and program management. His focus areas include leader and organizational development, strategic planning, international relations, and strategic communication. In his last assignment, General Rothstein held two roles. He was the vice commander of your Air University, where he oversaw the facets of 10 assigned commands, collectively graduating 50,000 resident and 120,000 non-resident students annually. He also served as the commander of the LeMay Center for Doctrine Development and Education, where he was responsible for efforts to develop, articulate, and advocate for the best practices for how the Air Force should conduct air, space, and cyberspace operations across the spectrum of conflict. He was commissioned as a distinguished graduate from the Air Force Academy in 1988. He served as a commander of a squadron, a group, and 3 different Air Force wings. He directed operations and planning for all Air Force operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Political Military Affairs, where he oversaw a diverse global portfolio covering all aspects of international security assistance, overseas basing agreements, and the reduction of landmines and other remnants of conflict. General Rothstein is a highly experienced F-16 fighter pilot, an instructor and graduate of the United States Air Force Weapons School, a C-130 pilot, which he flew while he was serving as the senior mentor to the commander of the Afghan Air Force. Currently resides in Montgomery, Alabama with his lovely bride, Jennifer, and his youngest son, Jackson, who is a high school freshman. Their oldest son, Seth, is currently going to school and working part-time in Bend, Oregon, and their middle son, Burke, is a freshman in the Corps of Cadets at Virginia Tech. Without further ado, please stand and welcome General Rothstein to the stage.
Thanks, folks. Please grab a seat. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Well, that was, thanks for that kind introduction, Lee. I'll give you the summary, which is I'm old, right? And I've been around for a bit. And so I'm excited here to share some of the scar tissue I have, some of the lessons I learned from a long time in the Air Force. Good to see you, Heather. And so what I thought I'd do today is just spend a little time talking about one word in particular, right? You know, I sat in these chairs at SOS, I think it was, 25 and a half years ago, if my memory serves, and we learned that you have to have 3 main points. So I am going to fail my SOS test because I really only have 1 main point today. And there's only one thing I ask you to think about as we leave this lesson and this lecture, if you will, is this word trust. And I believe that trust is a leader's most valuable commodity. It is the one thing that we trade in as a leader. And I hope that people trust in what I call the 4 C's that I've learned over the years. You may have heard them. There's different variations of this, but I hope that people trust in my character, my competence, my courage, and my caring, right? And on courage, by the way, as military professionals, certainly there's going to come a time that we're going to need our physical courage. But I think it's also our moral courage that's going to have to stand the test probably more often. I certainly know, even though I've got a few years downrange, like most of you do too, I've probably been tested on my moral courage more than my physical courage over the years. And I've not always stood up to that test as well as I'd like to, but hopefully I learn and get better. So the 4 C's: character, compassion, competence, and courage. And so what I want to do today is I want to talk and I want to just kind of think about this word trust for a bit. And And how do we put trust into practical application as a leader and as a commander through that lens, right? How do you establish trust? How do you build trust? How do you sustain trust? And how do you restore trust? Because that's going to have to happen sometimes too. And my hope is to give you some practical advice that I've picked up over the years, share it with you, let you marinate with it, let you chew on it, let you keep some, let you throw some away, and figure out what works for you. And I'll try to do that through the lens of a commander. All right? So that's the plan for today. And again, there's only one testable item, trust, one main point. Next slide, please. Now, when it comes to trust, I think of trust as like, I like to play poker, right? So I think of trust as I've got so many chips, right? And if I got a lot of chips, I can cash those chips in. I've got some trust with your Commandant. And so maybe I can ask him to do something for me that he goes, I know Mike, I'll trust him, right? Or a bank account. Now here's the thing as a leader. As a leader, you rarely know how many chips you actually have in your account. Now sometimes when you work with people very closely and that builds up over time, you got a good sense of it, right? But as a commander, as a squadron commander, as a group commander, as a wing commander, you're gonna have enough people in your unit that you don't really know. And guess what? Your folks lie to you. Just so you know, and let's be very clear about that, right? Your people are going to lie to you all the time. Now, I don't mean that like they're going to lie to you with malice and poor intent, right? But when they go, hey, how's everything going in your flight? Oh, it's all good, sir. Everything's, anything jacked up I can help you with? No, sir, it's all good, right? They're going to lie to you. They're not going to share the bad news. When you do something that makes them feel disrespected and unimportant, the odds that they're actually going to tell you are generally pretty low, unless you've built your culture where they feel comfortable sharing that with you. And even when you feel like you've done all that, just the human psychology is that they're probably not going to tell you. So you don't know how many chips you have in your account. And if you accept that, then that means that everything I do should always be built about how do I put more chips in the account. I never want to do anything that undermines the trust that people place in me. So what I want to do is I want to look at 13 behaviors over the next 30 minutes or so. Some we're going to dive a little deeper on, some I'll just sort of hit the wave tops on, that can help build and establish trust, both at the one-to-one individual level and also organizationally at the squadron level. All right? Next slide, please. Behavior number 1, talk straight. If you can talk straight with people, that will go a long way to building trust. Now, talk straight does not mean being overly candid, right? Like I have learned over the years not to say to my wife, Jen, hey, Jen, you look fat in those jeans, right? I have learned that that's probably not great for marriage maintenance 101. But as trust has developed in my relationship with my wife, I have learned that I'm better off when she goes, hey, Mike, does this look okay? That if I truly believe it doesn't actually, is that flattering for her? That I might say, hey, Jen, I'm not sure that's the best look for you. So I can have candor with kindness, right? Candor with kindness, but I talk straight. As a commander, as a leader, you want to think about talking straight individually to your folks, right? You want to think about talking straight to your unit about your organizational performance. You want to think about talking straight to your boss. Speak truth to power. And speak truth to power in a way that also occasionally lets your people see that you do that. It's really important that the people that work for you see that you're willing to talk straight to your boss. Because as you get more senior in the Air Force, when you get into command, even at the squadron level, one of the most important things you can do is establish a culture where people feel comfortable talking straight to you. And if you're not willing to talk straight to your boss, if they don't think you're willing to talk straight to your boss, they're going to be a lot less willing to talk straight to you. Right? Because we don't know, we can't fix what we don't know, right? It'll go to one of my future points. Talk straight. Next slide, please. Number 2, keep commitments. If you want to establish trust early as a commander, one of the best ways to do this, and I got very deliberate over the years in my mind to do this deliberately early in a command, is go in, make some commitments, and keep them. and then rinse and repeat. You've got to do it deliberately. You've got to say things like, hey, I'm going to commit that I'm going to do that for you. I even just threw that word out there sort of casually, right? So you heard it, that I'm making a commitment to you. And then, of course, I got to follow through, because commitments without follow through do just the opposite, right? They deteriorate trust. But make a commitment, keep it, rinse and repeat, is a great way to start building trust early in an organization, and of course, to sustain it as well too. And you can do that at the individual level, and you can do it at the organizational level, because as a commander of any unit, it's not just about the individual trust that people have in you. It's about the trust they have in your organization. And like it or not, the trust that people have in the commander becomes a reflection of the organization. That's just the way it works. So as a commander, you need to keep your trust high, because if the Air Force is going to trust your organization, a lot of it is a function of how well they trust you. Again, on your character, your competence, your courage, and your caring. Keep commitments, another great behavior to do this. Next, please. Demonstrate respect. Teddy Roosevelt said, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think John Maxwell, who's a leadership guru, also sort of made that phrase famous. You've got to demonstrate respect, right? You've got to see people as people, not as objects, but you got to treat people as people 100% of the time. There's a great, sort of a great thing that says, hey, if you want to get the mark of a leader, pay attention to how they treat the janitor. And you can insert janitor for anybody who is perceived to be at the lowest level of the organization. Do they treat the janitor like a person? Do they treat them with respect? Have you had the same cleaning person come into your office for the last 27 times and you couldn't even tell them what their name was because you never bothered to ask? Because they're kind of irrelevant to you. They're just the cleaning person. So you got to demonstrate respect. And the way, some ways you can do this as a commander, right, is get curious about your people. We've heard people talk in the Air Force, right? Every airman has a story. Find out their stories. Get curious, ask questions. It's a great way to help people be seen and respected. As a squadron commander, I gotta tell you, it might have sounded a little cheesy, but I love birthday cards, doing that for the folks in my unit. So one of my favorite squadron commanders of all time, I'm a lieutenant colonel, ADO in his squadron, and 20 years later, I still remember the handwritten birthday card that showed up in my container from a guy by the name of Scott Zobris. Some of you may know him. And Zob was thoughtful enough to just, hey, write me a little birthday card, happy birthday, and look at this, here I am, 20 years later. I still remember it. And if you've got a bigger squadron, it doesn't you can figure out how to make a little machine with your staff, right? So that they all show up, everyone who's got a birthday in October, shows up the second 2 weeks of September on your desk, and you take a half an hour and you knock them through, and maybe it's too big to write a handwritten note, but at least maybe you can sign it, or do something that shows you care. It doesn't have to be birthday cards. That's just one way, right? But demonstrate that you're thinking about people, that you care about them day in and day out. A couple ways you can demonstrate respect. And like I said earlier, when you fail to show respect to someone, a couple things are going to happen. One is they are most likely not going to tell you. Most likely, especially as you get more senior, especially as you get in the command positions. They're not going to say, hey, sir, I felt like you were sort of, probably not going to happen. So that's going to happen. And then they're going to start closing off to you. And they're going to do it in subtle ways that there's a good chance that you're not even going to notice it, because it's sort of like that tide that just sort of slowly goes out. And then your relationship with people changes because they start withholding value from you. They don't do it openly, right? They're not going to push back on you. But when you don't demonstrate respect, they start holding back on you slowly because they don't feel respected. And then things just don't start working as well. So if you want to build trust, demonstrate respect with everybody all the time. As a commander, you don't get to have a bad day. You don't. Maybe it's not fair. But I would, that's the way I thought about it. That's what I would tell, as a wing commander. I'd tell my folks, you don't get to have a bad day. You don't get to take it out on your people that things are tough. All right, next, please. Promote transparency. I love this picture, right? If you want to build trust, try to promote as much transparency as you can in your unit. One of my sort of principles that I tried to operate by as much as I could is I thought to myself, every decision I make, every single one as a commander should be able to stand the light of day. Now, I may not always have the time to do that. That's not practical. But philosophically speaking, when I find myself about to make a decision that I go, hey, we're going to do this, but I hope you don't find out about it, then it really makes me go, hey, let's slow down here. Is this actually the right decision? Right? And certainly some things aren't appropriate to share, right? It's not appropriate to share why I rated, this person this way and that person that way with each of them. That might not be appropriate from a privacy concern and things like that. But about decisions, that transparency is good. It builds trust. Simple example. I was a wing commander in Kabul a few years ago. 438th, Heather. She and I crossed paths there a little bit, not quite overlapping. And the group commander who essentially, was in charge of the FOB, the forward operating base that we were sitting on, who worked for me, wanted to go, he just basically wanted to say, let's make this a no-hat area. And to be honest, I didn't really care much one way or the other, and it was important to me that hey, he was running the FOB, let him make that decision, and I'll live with it. But I told him, I said, Virgil, there's one caveat. We'll do this, but like when the 4-star comes to visit and stuff, we're not putting hats on. Right? If this is a decision that we can stand and the 4-star comes and he's like, hey, how come you guys aren't wearing hats? We'll be like, this is why. If we think that decision can stand the light of day, then we'll do it. If you think it can't, and we're not willing to stand up to it, then we're not going to do it. So he thought about it, and so we did it, and it all worked out fine. But we've been there before, right? Where we go, hey, this is going to be no hat day until the boss comes by. Well, then maybe that's not the right decision. If that decision can't stand the light of day. In this case, it was his decision to the light of day, and it all worked out fine. So promoting transparency. One of the ways I try to do that, one of the ways I try to promote transparency as a leader is I talk a lot about command intent. And I go, hey, here's my intent on this. Because I want people to get inside my mind. I want to be transparent on what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking. For a couple reasons. First of all, when now things start to deviate from the facts at hand and I'm not around, if people understand my intent, right, they're going to be much more likely to make the adjustments with the facts they have and still drive to where we go. Another reason to talk a lot about intent is if my intent is jacked up for some reason, then the folks can go, hey, I think you might be wrong-headed on this. So letting that breathe and air out there is a chance to get feedback to say, as if I just tell them just do A, B, and C as opposed to the why, it doesn't give them as much to work with. So I think very deliberately about sharing my command intent and getting feedback on that as much as I can to promote transparency. Next, please. Right wrongs. So this picture up here is basically a bunch of brands. It actually doesn't make the top 10 for 2020. A couple of them do. Amazon, Chick-fil-A do. But these are brands that have, generally speaking, and I know not everyone in here may agree, especially with the one on the top right. I know there's probably folks who are not Apple fans in here, but have pretty good customer service, right? When things go wrong, they're pretty quick to fix them. So if you want to establish and sustain trust, you got to right wrongs. It's not just enough to admit mistakes. That's step one. But you got to go the step farther, and to the best of your ability, you got to try to fix it. And that actually builds trust. In fact, I was just reading recently that, at least in the customer support area, folks who screw up and fix it, right, have some sort of screw up and then remedy it, actually have higher trust than people who don't screw up at all, right, with customers. Now that's probably there's probably a whole bunch of business going out there, hey, how can we screw things up so we can go fix them? I'm not necessarily recommending that as a course of action, but if you can right wrongs, it helps build trust. And oh, by the way, future squadron commanders, future civilian leaders, you have to do it not just on behalf of you, but you got to try to do it on behalf of the Air Force too, because we represent the Air Force in these situations. And sometimes, sometimes it had nothing to do that you screwed up. It's, something let's pick on AFPC, something AFPC screwed up, but now you got to take that on to try to fix it and try to help right that. And that builds trust. Next, please. I love this picture, right? Toy Story, what a great movie. What a great movie about loyalty, right? About looking out for each other. But I will tell you that loyalty and leadership, I think, may be one of the most nuanced and difficult things that you will struggle with, particularly as a young commander, and what that actually means. So we're going to do a little audience participation here. So here's the question. Please vote one way or the other. I know you may, it's academic freedom. No one's taking notes or anything like that. Let's just get a sense of the room, okay? I'm going to give you a question, and there's going to be, you can vote one way or the other. I'm voting both ways. Don't try to read me. I've done this before. So if I am your new commander, do you owe me your professional loyalty as soon as I take the job, or should I have to earn it? Right? Do you owe me your professional loyalty as soon as I take the job, or should I have to earn it? Who says as soon as I take the job? I'm voting both ways. Who says I should have to earn it? Okay, so I'm going to say it was probably 75-25-ish. By the way, almost 180 out from when I gave this talk it was actually, I think, over at Wood. I think it was 2 years ago, because last year with the COVID stuff, we didn't do it. Almost 180 out. And I would suggest to you that in any organization, particularly in the military, you've got to give me, we work better when we give our professional loyalty the day someone takes command. And if we withhold that, waiting for them to build up all those trust chips, then we do that kind of at the peril of the organization. Because things may happen on day one, and oh, by the way, they've come up through this organization, they should have maybe some trust chips sort of built up along the way. They didn't get to be a squadron commander by just, walking in with flip-flops, cut-off jeans, and a shaggy beard off the street. But our organization doesn't work if we don't give folks our professional loyalty. Now, I recognize I gave you an unfair question, right? There's so much more that goes into this, right? What did you mean by loyalty? What did I mean by loyalty? I get all that. But I think about loyalty and the 4 U's. And I stole this from, I think it was General Hornberg many years ago, who was the then Tactical Air Command / Air Combat Command commander. The 4 U's. If it's good for you, but it's not good for the unit, probably not the right thing to do. If it's good for the unit, but not good for the USAF, probably not the right thing to do. And if it's good for the USAF, but not good for the USA, probably not the right thing to do. And the takeaway here is our loyalty has got to be nested. And certainly we have to have loyalty to the folks in our squadron. But it's got to be nested, and it's got to be aligned with the larger, broader needs of the Air Force. Because here's what happens, and I've had squadron commanders who I felt were misaligned, and I felt like their loyalty to their people and their squadrons did not stay nested with the needs of the Air Force. And so I stopped trusting them, right? As a wing commander, I couldn't trust that squadron commander whose people were all way better than average. Everyone in her squadron was way better than average. Which, having been a wing commander 3 times, I'll tell you, was not the case. But she was trying to be so loyal to her people that she was fighting for them all the time, that I stopped trusting her on that. She was a good squadron commander overall and a great lady, and I love her. But on that issue, on the issue of her ability to have perspective and rate her personnel, I had almost zero trust for her. Because she misplaced her loyalty. Because she was fighting for her people when they truly weren't there. So you got to be thinking about staying nested uphill. Now, I'm not saying you don't fight for your people sometimes. When that's aligned, right? When you've got someone and you know that the needs of this person, whether it's for a promotion, whether it's a humanitarian situation, whatever it is, align with the broader needs of the Air Force, man, then you roll up your sleeves and you fight for the dickens, right? You go all Toy Story on them. But if you do that just because they're your people, as opposed to because that's the right thing to do for the Air Force, then you might be able to shoot that arrow once. Maybe. Maybe even not, to be quite frank, depending on what it is. And then you're out of arrows. Because the people above you, you will fail to establish and grow trust with them. So you got to always think about that alignment. And you got to be willing to make sometimes the hard calls. Loyalty and the 4 U's. Next, please. Confront reality. I love this picture, right? The elephant in the room. If you want to keep trust going, you got to confront the realities that are out there, right? The commander who doesn't confront the realities, there's one of 3 things going on that his people are thinking, or her people are thinking. Number 1, the leader has his head in the sand and is clueless. Or number 2, the leader cares more about looking good than being good, and so this leader doesn't want to be associated with any of this bad stuff going on. And number 3, the leader doesn't trust us to deal with the issue. None of those are particularly good outcomes that you want as a leader. None of those help build trust. And oh, by the way, when you don't confront the reality, you're not actually rolling up your sleeves and getting after it and fixing it, right? So confronting reality does not mean, complaining. In fact, there's a terrific book, Good to Great, ought to be on your leadership library if it's not, if you haven't read it already. Jim Collins, I believe. And in leadership, in Good to Great, he talks about the really great leaders when they're faced with crisis and trouble and these tough realities. They take them head on. And they acknowledge the things that are hard, right? They acknowledge all that, but they never lose hope in essentially long-term victory. They always maintain hope that we've got all these challenges, but we will work through them. We're not going to work through them tomorrow, maybe. It might take 2 weeks, it might take 2 years, it might take 2 decades. So you keep long-term hope alive. That's really important as a leader. And you got to believe it and work towards it, and you got to have a plan to work towards it, but you also confront the realities that you're dealing with. Really important to building trust, sustaining trust. Next, please. Listen first. Or as I think Stephen Covey said, right? Seek to understand, then be understood. Seek to understand, then be understood. So as a commander, as a leader in the Air Force, really work on listening first. Right? When you come into a new unit, be cautious of going, hey, I got this, here's where we're going, right? I try to think about a listening period. 60 days-ish, it depends. If you're on a remote, you might need to accelerate that a little bit. If you really understand the unit already because you're fleeting up, that might change things. But my first 60 days in a new command are essentially a listening tour. trying to understand why the way things are. And then after 60 days, I'm going to gather the team and I'm going to go, here's what I think, I'm seeing, here's where I think we need to go, and I'm going to get inputs from the team. And then I'm going to put out our strategy or our vision or go tell my boss, here's where I think I need to focus. But I'm going to try to listen first, strategically. Tactically, by the way, try to listen first. In a staff meeting, I try to talk last, not first as the commander. If I talk first as the commander, I am invariably, whether I want to or not, shaping the outcome of that meeting, shaping the inputs on opinions, because people tend to align with what I'm saying as the leader. So much like I go back to my poker, right? Always better to act last, as if anybody plays cards, right? I got more information. It allows me to see what's going on, it allows me to read the room better, and then come up with, not only helps me from influencing other people and I don't get their honest feedback, but it also now allows me to gather inputs, to listen first and probably come up with a smarter way we're going. And then think about your listening skills, okay? I am a terrible interrupter. It is like one of my worst habits. I do it all the time, and I suck at it. I'm still trying to work on it. My wife points this out to me relentlessly, and I'm like, don't! I did it again. I interrupt her all the time. I interrupt people, not with malice, right? Not to shout them down, not presidential debate kind of interruptions. Usually they're good interruptions, like, oh yeah, I thought, right? But still, I'm not saying you got to become a massive introvert, but watch as a leader your interruptions. They echo second or third. One is it tends to shut people up, by the way, because most people don't like being interrupted. And when you're interrupted by the boss, it's even worse. And so what it trains them to do is just to talk less and share less with you. So I keep working on that. I struggle mightily. That's one of my worst things, right? And listening, of course, is not just about hearing the words come in, but it's really trying to listen with an open mind and an open heart. So you're actually kind of hearing what's going on. Okay, listen first. Don't forget about body language too and how you listen as well. Next. So I'll probably have to read this for you. Clarify expectations, but if you can't read it, it says, this is a Dilbert. I'm not necessarily a huge Dilbert fan, but I love this little cartoon, right? So the boss goes, how are you doing on your unspoken objectives? And Dilbert goes, my what? And pointy-haired boss goes, I'm referring to the goals I have in mind that I've never mentioned. How are those going? Oh, I'm totally nailing them, right? So how many of us have bosses with all these unstated expectations and objectives? And how many of us have done a lot of hard work on a project, brought it to our boss, and then our boss, I go, hey boss, here you go. He's like, that's not what I was looking for. That's demoralizing. It undermines trust, probably more in the competence area and not so much in character. So if you want to build trust, then put extra time into clarifying expectations. As a leader, when I don't get what I want, I start looking in concentric circles around my own 2 feet. Because most likely, there's something that I could have done better that could have set this up for success. And I've gotten over the facts that sometimes it feels uncomfortable to be explicitly clear on what you want, but clarity is kindness. Clarity is kindness, folks. If you can be explicitly clear with what you actually want, both taking the time to think about it, which is sometimes our problem, that we haven't actually thought about what we want, and then taking the time to help people understand what your expectations are. It's actually really helpful. It saves you a lot of time down, and it builds trust. Clarify expectations. I cannot tell you how many times I go back to this as one of those behaviors I really try to work on. Sometimes I get it right. A lot of times I get it wrong. But it's always great advice. Next. Get better. I grew up as a fighter pilot in our Air Force, and one of the things I liked about it, is we were so focused on just getting better, right? And not just fighter pilots in the Air Force, plenty of other folks. But you want to build trust, get better, right? Improve at your job. People will forgive you if you make mistakes, especially early in your command on competence, not on character, by the way. You kind of only got one shot on your airmen with character. But on competence things, but get better. And oh, by the way, get better not as an individual, but get better as a unit, right? Think about organizational improvements, CPI, all that stuff. You want to build trust, just keep getting better. Next, please. Another cartoon I love here, right? These guys are all in the boat. Your end's sinking, my end's not. It's not me, it's you, right? I have met the enemy, it's you guys. All good. We're all good here. See? We're not sinking. Yeah, but we're sinking together, right? So if you want to build trust, you got to practice accountability. And I don't mean accountability as code for UCMJ and discipline and all that. Sometimes it might be that. But I really mean accountability on that team where you create the culture on your team where people say, yeah, I own this, or I screwed this up, I'll fix it. Yeah, this is on me. I'm not blaming, I'm not making excuses. I think of accountability as level 0, level 1, and level 2. At level 0 accountability, and I don't know, that's just kind of how I think about it. Level 0 accountability, I don't take accountability, right? I make excuses. You know, hey, sorry I was late for the lesson today, but, you know, but the line at the gate was like all the way around the corner almost to the NYC, right? I'm making an excuse. I'm not taking responsibility for that. If I really cared about being on time, I would have, planned the extra 5 minutes. So I blame, I make excuses. At level 1, I take accountability for my actions. But level 2 accountability is where we want to be. At level 2 accountability is I'm accountable not only for my actions, but I'm also accountable for my impact on the team. Right? My impact on everyone else. And that's where I want to be. You know, there's, one of the skills they say that leaders need is the ability to hold people accountable. Have you ever heard that, right? You got to be able to hold people accountable. Okay? I think that's really important. More important, though, is developing accountable people. As a leader, if you can develop accountable people, then you don't have to hold them accountable. Right? One way you can do this, and you can start practicing developing accountable people, I started doing this maybe 5 or 7 years ago, was on feedback, right? And we're starting to get there a little bit with the Airman Comprehensive Assessment. But in the Air Force, historically, performance feedback was, something that I would put together as a supervisor. I'd schedule a meeting with my subordinate, and I'd give them feedback. About 5 to 7 years ago, I started to flip that script. And I said, hey, why don't you schedule feedback with me and you come tell me how you think you're doing on stuff. And we'll have a conversation about it, right? We'll do some coaching, we'll talk about it, and I'm going to prepare for it too. I'm not just putting it all on you. Well, why don't you come? I said, well, maybe it should be our job. And that gave me an idea. So we started kind of doing it a little bit. I didn't screw that one up, but we're fixing it, right? And that becomes a normal, just the way the conversations go. And that's what you want in your unit. If you want to build trust, that's how that should go. People put their cards on the table, and we make the best hands. We practice that accountability. We model it first, right? And you model it as a leader by being willing to tell your people where you screwed things up, where you failed them organizationally, where you failed them individually. And so you model that, and then you get them to start being able to do yourself. And then when that happens, when you start having a unit where there's accountability going up, down, left, right, hugely powerful. Hugely powerful for building trust and, oh, by the way, improving performance. Practice accountability. Next, please. I am not necessarily a Tom Brady fan, just for the record. In fact, I'm a Dolphins fan, which is A, just sad in and of it by itself for the last 20 years. So that's just sad. I get that. And B, it sort of makes you not want to like Tom Brady. But it is hard to argue that Brady and Belichick have not delivered. I mean, they've delivered results, over the last 20 years. So if you want to build trust, if you want to sustain trust, deliver results, right? If you deliver, that builds trust. Look for ways that you can deliver results. Next, please. And then if you want to build trust, you got to extend trust. Smartly. Don't ask me to do brain surgery. That's probably don't trust me to do that. So you want to extend smart trust. But if you want to build and sustain trust, you got to extend trust. Next, please. So here's the summary. And for the record, these come straight out of a book by Stephen Covey called The Speed of Trust. Stephen M.R. Covey, who is the son of Stephen Covey, if you're familiar with him from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I came across, I've been thinking a lot about the words trust, kind of grown up as an officer and even as a squadron commander. I think I was in the second half of my squadron commander, I came across this book. And I was like, oh my gosh, these are the kind of things I've been thinking about, but far more articulate than I ever could have thought about them. And so in here, I wrote inside, I carried one of those notebooks around like we do to take notes on every notebook, and I meant to bring one with me from the house, from somewhere in my boxes from the Air Force. On the inside cover, I wrote these words on every one. And I would say that once a week-ish, not every day, not once a month, somewhere there, once a week-ish, I would just open up this and I would go, hey, I need to make sure I'm trying to do these things. And I have found that if I can do these things pretty well, if I can focus on this was such a great practical recipe for behaviors that I could think about that would help build trust and improve performance in my unit. And that's why I want to share them with you. Build and sustain trust. And so there, I highly recommend the book. I personally like about the first 2/3 of the book, more so than the last third personally. But I think the first 2/3 are just terrific. Terrific reading for leaders, in or out of the Air Force. Next, please. Now, as you come in as a commander, I want to, what are some things you can do to get off to a good start, right? You want to hit the ground running on building trust coming in as a commander. So these are some things I've learned over the years. And I think I got to command 7 different organizations in the Air Force, so I got a little bit of time screwing this up, getting some things right. As much as practical, try to research your new organization, right? Figure out who the key personnel are, the mission instructor, right? Show interest that you care before you even show up. And sometimes you'll need to negotiate that a little bit with the sitting commander. I've come across some sitting commanders who, and they tend to be the rarity, but I have come across that they don't want you anywhere near their unit or talking to them. They're very hands-off until that day of command. I think that's personally a mistake. Don't be that guy. I think the better handoff we get, the better off we are. Now, do it in a way that's respecting. Don't try to come in and run the organization for you there. Be smart about all that. But see what you can learn about it. Show the interest, even if it's just folks like your, hey, who are the flight commanders? Who are the officers? Who are the key senior NCOs? So you start to learn names and things like that. Because, when I walk in day one and go, oh, there's Colonel McGee. Hey, you're the vice commandant, aren't you? Yeah, right. And I, as opposed to who are you? Even just that little bit helps a little. Right? I think it's worth trying to deliver a thoughtful introductions and expectations pitch, however you want to call that. I'm going to show you on the next slide. Don't go there quite yet, please. But I'll show you on the next slide what that might look like. But you want to sit down day one and say, hey, here's kind of who I am. Your leadership philosophy, not so much here's how we're going to run the unit, because you still got to listen and learn on that. But you want to get folks through that initial sense of knowing who you are, where you come from, sort of how you see the world. And so I'm very deliberate, and I want to do that to as many people as practical. With a squadron, if I can do it with the whole squadron, I'm going to do it with the whole squadron. If that's not practical, then I'm going to try to soak as practically deep and as wide as I can, because I'm trying to get through that, get as much of that as I can out there. Minimize your say-do gap. Lots of young commanders come in, man, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and then 2 months later, they haven't done any of that. So watch that. As you learn about your unit, both internally and externally, because you got peers and other units and things like that, I like playing away games, right? I like trying to get out and learn where people are. Don't have people come to your office. Try to get out, lead with your feet, and do all that. And then look for a couple quick wins, too. Man, I mean, be deliberate about it. I'm going to go in. I'm looking for a quick win. A quick win I had as a squadron commander. I'm out on day 3 or 4. I was an OSS commander at Nellis. And I'm down in the radar control facility. And the microwave's broken. Right? And we just kind of walk, hey, what's up? Yeah. And someone was, yeah, microwave's broken. Boom. 2 days later, they had a new microwave. It's an easy fix. Someone just hadn't gotten around to do it. Quick win. Small. Avoid over-promising. We talked about that. And then listen first. We talked about that. All right, next. Okay, that's just you're not supposed to be able to read any of this. It's there if you want, if someone has the slides. This is just sort of how I kind of, a bit about me, broad command thoughts, setting the culture, setting the standard, set the vector, working with me, keeping me informed, decision making, what you should expect from me, my initial focus areas, final thoughts, right? That's kind of how I laid it out for me. It's a briefing guide. Do what works for you. But this should be hard. This should really force you to think about what you really care about and what you want to transmit up front and what you don't. Next, please. And then lastly, as I wrap up here, sometimes we break trust, right? And whether it's our own fault or not, right? Because trust is about perception. You can do everything right, and trust can be broken. Right? Because trust is all about how people perceive you. And you don't want to be a slave to that, but you got to be mindful of that as a leader. Because if you guys don't trust me as your leader, I can't lead you, even if I did everything right. So when trust gets broken, how do you think about restoring trust? Next, please. First, right, and this is the foot stomp. It's going to take a long time, right? It's going to take longer than you think it should. It's not going to be fair. And if I didn't say it already, it's going to take a long time. But you got to stick with it. Start with admitting your mistakes, owning your accountability like we talked about, identifying root causes and trying to fix it. If you're trying to restore trust, be mindful about deliberately increasing communication, frequency of communication in particular, more and more reps, right? It's like you're trying to pave over something with a very thin veneer. Each one's really thin, really thin, really thin, really thin. Help and support each other's dailies, right? You're paving over this very deliberately, but you can't, but it's all in thin layers. All right? A couple of quotes there to end with, right? You can't talk yourself out of a problem you behaved yourself into. And we tend to judge others by our intentions, tend to judge ourselves by our intentions, where we give ourselves a benefit of doubt, and judge others by their actions. That's what you got to do to restore trust. Okay, next, please. Last thoughts. Talked about perception already. As I think Chief Goldfein wrote in his book many years ago, right? Give away credit, but claim the blame. Everyone should see the same you, right? The person you are to your bosses ought to be the same as the person you are to your peers and subordinates. If they're seeing different people, then you're probably not as transparent. Now, the style may change a little bit, but it ought to be the same you. There ought to be one version of you, not the version that looks up to their boss and the version that looks down to their subordinates and they see very different things. If you can be well-intentioned, people are forgiving. If they believe you are well-intentioned, if they believe you're trying to do the right thing and you're trying to do the right thing, they'll be forgiving. But if they think you're just looking out for yourself, it goes quickly. Build trust early, don't wait. When the crisis hits is not the time to build trust. And I think this is what it all boils down to, right? Leadership, it's a gift given to us by those who follow. They got to follow our orders, but they don't have to truly follow us. And if they don't trust us, they're not going to follow us. Okay, I think we got some time for questions. Next slide, please. I think is the question slide, should be, or if they put it up. Okay. So, what's on your guys' mind? You can ask, here's the rule, you can ask me any question about anything, and I will only promise you one thing, is I will give you a candid answer to the best of my knowledge. I will not necessarily agree with you. You may not like my answer, but it will be honest. Nothing's off limits that I can think of. Okay, got one from the line. I know there's a gentleman going on the mic.
Thanks, sir. From Major Linz, Flight 23, did you tell the squadron commander that you stopped trusting her from your story? Broadly, should you tell our followers if we don't trust them, and then how can they regain our trust?
Yeah, great question. So yes, I did, is the answer to your question, right? As I sat her down with her group commander, let's call her Mary, and I said, hey, Mary, here's the deal, is I feel like you're always pushing your people in a way that doesn't quite match reality. And because of that, I have a hard time believing anything you're saying. When I say not believing, I knew she was well-intentioned, right? She had a great heart. She wasn't trying to slide things over on me. This was not a matter of her being dishonest. This was a matter of her judgment not being able to judge well because she almost cared too much in one direction. And so I told her that. Yes, I think there comes a time when we need to tell, it goes back to talking straight, right? If I get at the point where I'm not trusting folks, then I need to share that with them in some way. And you got to be a little thoughtful about how you do that. It'll be different with different people, but if you're sitting there going, you've lost trust in folks and you don't tell them, then you're not talking straight with them, right? Okay, let's go up here.
Good morning, sir. Major Mahan, Division 1, Flight 4. Thanks for taking the time to focus on one topic. I know we tend to focus on the highlights of leadership. Trust seems to be one of the most nuanced things we've talked about in class so far, so I appreciated your lecture. The question I have for you is, do you see connections between military culture and our desire for control and risk aversion within different areas of the military culture, and the ability to essentially build trust, i.e., if we need control, there's little trust, or when there's trust, there's opportunity to collaborate. What are your thoughts on that?
Great question, right? I should tell you, so I was the graduation speaker at ACSC 2019, I guess. No, yeah, 2019, a year and a half ago, right? And I handed everybody a card. I talked about taking risk. And I gave every graduating ACSC student a card to put in their wallet that just said, take risk. Take risk. Because we've got to do that. And I believe in our Air Force, our desire for control has overridden our willingness to take risk, our willingness to build leaders who are going to do some things right, do some things wrong, make mistakes, we dust them off, we put them back in the game and that sort of thing. So I think that's a tremendous challenge for our Air Force right now, particularly as we go back, as we think about great power competition, as we think about getting into like a real slugfest if we were to get there, right? You all. I guess I'm not in the Air Force anymore, but you know what I mean, right? So I think we've got to trust our folks enough to let them fail and pick them back up, coach them, right? It's not okay to let you screw up and not say, hey, I think, here's how we could do this better. So you got to coach folks and not just say you get to do whatever you want, but to not say you only get one chance. I'll give you a quick example of, this is something I just heard. I'm going to use it, but please take this with a grain of salt because I don't know if my facts are correct. But I heard about a wing, I won't say which wing, where this particular wing has put out an order that their people can't eat in any restaurants downtown because of COVID. And as I heard this was someone essentially saying, hey, have you heard this in other wings? Which I haven't, but I certainly am not as close to the Air Force as you guys are right now. So let's assume that's the case. One wing commander in the Air Force says, you all can't eat indoors in any restaurants. You can eat outside, but you can't eat inside because of COVID. And you guys go, well, that's kind of a stupid idea. I don't know if it is or not. Let's just say you are saying that. I'm not trying to trash the wing commander. That came out really poorly. I apologize. But if we don't allow that uneven, right, this wing's doing it one way, this wing's doing it another, then we're not going to trust our leaders to make those decisions, to learn from them. And this need for control that says we're going to put out one answer for the Air Force, and it's going to come, well, let me see, if I want all the wings to do it the exact same way, then, all right, I guess it's on CQ Brown. Maybe General Wilson or whatever before he leaves, right? Which that's how we get to this need for control. So if we're going to be willing to give up some control, we've got to be willing to live with uneven execution within some sort of boundary, right? Right now, if the wing commander had said everyone's on lockdown and no one's leaving the base, then maybe that's too much. But does that kind of get at your question? Okay, super. Yeah, Bill.
Sir Major Bill Height, Susan, 21st Stews, Flight 18. Quick question on, we've had a block of organizational culture, and part of that we've looked at case studies of leaders who did really well at the small scale level, but then as their organization increases in size, they've ran into major issues. Would you say that your thoughts are tailored to small, or do you have to tailor continually along the way, or are they uniform throughout?
Another great question. So I think that these hold true as you scale. And I'm trying to make sure I'm not just saying that. I'm trying to, I'm thinking through the list in my head. Are there things that don't scale? Certainly, I think it works at an individual level, for sure, at a squadron level. And I've led squadron, group, wing, numbered Air Force / Air University level. I think it all scales. I think I think that's the answer. I think you may have to think about it differently a little bit at each level, but I think the basic premises all scale. Yeah.
Sir, Major Hughes, Division I, Flight 4. What advice do you have for future leaders and future commanders for situations where your professional loyalty may cause you to break commitments you've previously made to your followers?
Yeah. Whew. I can guarantee you that's going to happen, right? It's a matter of when, not if, right? So there's always going to be a tug and pull between loyalties, right, or commitments you've made. If you feel like you've made a commitment and then you've got to break that commitment because as you either things change or you screwed it up or whatever reason, right, as you go, no, in the end, I've got to do it this way, then when I break a commitment, I get back to try to promote transparency, right? And I go, and if I can, to the max extent possible, I'm going to own up to it, and I'm going to say, hey guys, I know I committed to do this. I know we talked about this. I've got to break that commitment to you. And I feel bad about it. Here's why, though. And here's why I think that as I balance this out, that if I kept this commitment to you, it would be misaligned with what's right for us, what's right for the Air Force, et cetera. And so I own it, but we're doing it this way. And is that, then you're back into, right, restoring trust potentially, right? Or maybe if you're lucky, people, if your logic is good and sound, maybe a lot of those folks go, and you can communicate it well too, right? You got to be able to articulate it. Maybe they go, okay, I see that. But if you think everyone's going to see it, you're probably just wishful thinking, right? Because there's still going to be some people who are going to feel like you broke your commitment to them. Those hard things are going to come up for us sometimes. Did that address your question, or? Yes, sir, it did. Okay, super. All right, I think we are at end time. So I told Bill before, he talked about he's going to share a coin with me, but I said you probably ought to wait to see whether I passed the test or not. So he's coming up here. So He apparently isn't going to talk straight to me, so.
Sir, on behalf of the student body, thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on trust with us. Our motto this year is opportunity in adversity and strength in diversity. And fittingly, our motto's on a poker chip. And so if I may, I would like to add a chip to your stack.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks. Thanks for letting me spend time with you. I appreciate it. Good luck to all of you. Lead well. We are all counting on you. No pressure, though. Maybe a little bit. Thanks. Please carry on. Thank you.